Hello everyone, this is part 23 of What If Naruto Trains Seriously, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Tsunade rubbed her forehead as she looked at Naruto, who was currently standing at attention in front of her desk with the blue-haired woman that she had seen with him by his side, and couldn't help but wonder if this boy was trying to force her into retirement via stress. Just when she thought they had everything figured out, the last remaining Uzumaki aside from her managed to drop an exploding tag on her. So you're telling me that the Uchiha Madara that is supposedly secretly leading Akatsuki from the shadows really isn't Uchiha Madara, but someone impersonating him? She had just been given a report on what had happened during their capture Itachi mission. While she was pleased to know that Sasuke had been captured during that mission, this new information on the man known as Toby, who they had assumed was Uchiha Madara, was troubling. Tsunade really wasn't sure if she should be relieved or terrified by that knowledge. The founder of the Uchiha clan had been a shinobi of monstrous strength. The only ninja said to be on par with her grandfather, Senju Hashirama, who was still considered to be the most powerful ninja in the elemental nations. If the man Naruto fought was not Madara, then it meant they wouldn't have to deal with such a powerful ninja. On the other side of the coin toss, the man Naruto fought was capable of controlling the Kyuubi just like her grandfather's rival, which could mean they were dealing with someone who was not only just as powerful, but also a complete unknown. Neither of those answers brought much comfort. Kyuubi seems to think so, Naruto answered her with a shrug. And since he knows the bastard personally, I can only assume that the fox is right. Aside from that, I trust Kyuubi's judgment when it comes to these things. Tsunade raised an eyebrow. Are you sure you're not misplacing your trust? This is the being that nearly destroyed Konoha, you know. I doubt Kyuubi would lie about something like this. Naruto defended the powerful nine-tailed kitsune in his guts. He doesn't benefit from lying to me or withholding information that could potentially end with him becoming a tool for an Uchiha again. If there was one thing that Naruto knew about the fox, it was that he hated being manipulated or controlled in any way. He worked with Naruto because it was a benefit to him right now, but even with the threat of being sealed in a statue should Akatsuki capture the blonde, it was still reluctant to do so. Naruto could only imagine how Kyuubi would feel about becoming an Uchiha's pet once more. That does make sense, Tsunade sighed, more than ever wishing that she didn't need to be sober for this report so she could reach under her desk and grab some sake from her stash. I suppose I'll just have to trust you about the Kyuubi then. Now that we have that out of the way. Tsunade's eyes strayed from Naruto and went to Konan, narrowing as they did. You can begin telling me who this is and why she ended up with you and a half-s Jiraiya. For one of the first times in a long while, Naruto found himself at a loss for words. It wasn't that he had no intention of telling Tsunade who Konan was, because really, it wasn't like he could keep this from her. No, his issue ran more along the lines of trying to figure out what he should tell her first. After all, how do you tell someone that the woman before them is not only one of the 4 women who had agreed to be his wife, but also a member of the very organization trying to capture his Bayu? It's not like he could just come out and say, "This is my bride-to-be, Konan, I'm sure you remember her from when the two of you met in Am during the Second Shinobi World War. Oh, and by the way, she also happens to be working with Akatsuki, you know, the organization made up of S-ranked criminals trying to steal the Bayu. But don't worry, she no longer agrees with their ideals and is actually my spy within said organization now." Yeah, he could see that going over really well. This required more subtlety. Do you remember when I mentioned during my first few days here how I refused to reveal 2 of the women who agreed to marry me for their own protection? Well, so much for subtlety. Yes, Tsunade said, furrowing her brow as she tried to figure out where this was going. You wouldn't even reveal who they were to me, stating that the more people who know the less of a secret it is the safer she was. The woman's eyes widened as she snapped her gaze towards Naruto, and then towards Konan. They came back towards Naruto a second later and her jaw nearly dropped. You're telling me that she's one of your wives? The technical term would be betrothed, Naruto stated, a bit of mirth in his voice at seeing Tsunade looking as if she had just a brick. But yes, this woman is my betrothed. Her name is Conan. It's a pleasure to see you again, Tsunade-sama. Conan finally spoke up for the first time since the meeting began, bowing her head slightly towards the blonde Hokage as a sign of respect. See me again. Tsunade blinked after picking her metaphorical jaw off the floor. She looked at the woman with slightly narrowed eyes. Are you telling me we've met before? That is correct. You may not remember me, but I was one of the war orphans that Jiraiya took in when you three were in a Megakure during the Second Shinobi World War. Conan's words spurred the memories of the Godime Hokage. She remembered the Second World War quite well, though she wished she didn't. That was not a time she liked to remember, as it was the war where she lost both her younger brother, Nawaki, as well as her boyfriend and fiancé, Dan. However, she did remember her time in Am. It was hard to forget, seeing as how that had been when she, Jiraiya, and Orochimaru had fought against Shanshuo no Hanzo, Hanzo of the Salamander, and earned themselves the lure of Densetsu no Sanin. Thinking back on that time, Tsunade did remember meeting 3 orphans, 2 boys and a girl with blue hair, amber eyes, and an origami flower in her hair. Blinking several times, Tsunade looked at Conan and overlapped the image of the young girl with the woman standing before her. They were nearly identical, minus the labret L, skin-tight leather pants, shoulder-less leather top, and the sensual curves that most women would K for. Gaki. Tsunade growled out. You'd better have a good reason for marrying someone who's old enough to be your mother. Naruto blinked. Conan blinked. Naruto blinked once more for good measure. But, Mei's almost twice my age, Naruto pointed out. Doesn't that make her old enough to be my mother as well? That was not even mentioning Yugao and Yugito, both of whom were in their mid-20s. Thinking on it, the only one who was even close to him in age was Kayuki, who was only 20 years old. Even then, the only reason marriage with her was considered legal was because he was a shinobi, and therefore an adult. And as things stand, the only reason I'm even tolerating your relationship with Mei is because I can see that she truly loves you, Tsunade stated with a stern look. Even now a part of me is telling me not to let her anywhere near you because of your age difference. This woman, the busty blonde pointed at Conan, is at least 10 years older than Mei is. That means she's over 20 years older than you. Naruto's lips thinned into a small line. He was well aware of the difference of the age between himself and Conan, and was even more aware that their relationship would turn a lot of heads, and not necessarily in a good way once people learned about their age difference. Still, he had assumed Tsunade would be supportive, if not because Conan loved him, then because she understood him better than most due to her also being a student of Jiraiya's. That she didn't hurt more than he would ever let on. While it is true that I am technically over 20 years older than Naruto-kun, Conan began speaking before either of the 2 blondes could. Both of them turned their attention to her, Naruto with curiosity, and Tsunade with animosity. That is only partially correct. You see, due to an incident a few years before the Third Great Ninja War, Nagato, or Pain as he has stylized himself as, became crippled. This led him to creating his paths, which splits up his Rinnegan abilities into 6 individual Being forced to use this jutsu not only greatly weakened his Rinnegan, but also leaves him very vulnerable if people knew how to exploit it. Because of this we came up with a backup plan. Should Nagato ever I was to implant his Rinnegan into my own eyes and continue his work. Tsunade raised an eyebrow at the woman, her anger still simmering beneath the surface, but buried under her curiosity. That's a very interesting tale and all, but what does that have to do with the age difference between you and Naruto? Because we were not aware of how long it would take to accomplish our goals, Nagato felt it would be best if I was able to live longer. For the past 18 years he's been using a modified version of the Gedo, Rinnya Tensei no Jutsu, Outer Path, Samsara of Heavenly Life technique, which when used normally would allow him to revive a person who has recently become diseased. However, the modified version is different in that it stores souls in the King of Hell, and then converts them into a form of medical chakra that can rejuvenate the body. In other words, it's capable of turning back the hands of time, Tsunade concluded for Conan before the Blunit could finish her speech. Or stalling him, Conan told her. Which is what happened to me. While I've technically lived for 42 years, my body has not aged since I was 24. HMPH. Tsunade huffed as she glared at the younger woman, before begrudgingly speaking. I suppose that would explain why you don't look your age. There was a hint of jealousy in the female Hokage's voice that almost had Naruto smiling. He could only wonder at how pissed the blonde woman was at knowing that while her young looks were due to a henge, Conan's was because she really was just that young. A few seconds later Naruto realized something that caused him to blink. How come I didn't know anything about this? I didn't think it was relevant at the time, Conan admitted with a shrug. Would knowing that I am physically younger than you thought I was make a difference? Well, no, Naruto admitted, scratching his cheek with his index finger. Then it doesn't matter, does it? Asked Conan with the slightest of smiles. And besides, I never really thought about what our age meant for us until Tsunade-sama brought it up. Which was true, ever since they had met Conan had never really thought about Naruto's age. While her lover sometimes tended to act childish, more often than not he displayed the maturity of someone 3 times his age. Because of that she had never really seen him as a 16-year-old boy, but simply as a man who had the same desire for peace that she did. Tsunade stared at the pair for a long time, before heaving a sigh and slumping back in her chair. Despite this she still managed to fix them both with a glare. I still don't like it, she told them without reservation. Even if you are physically as young as you claim, I still dislike the fact that you two have such an intimate relationship. Naruto opened his mouth, most likely to come up with some retort, but Tsunade held up a hand to stop him. However, both of you are consenting adults, and furthermore, ninja. I can't tell you how to live your life and that includes who you can and can't be intimate with. I'll let this go on the condition that you, she pointed at Conan, never betray the trust and love he has given you. I give you my word that I would never betray Naruto, Conan said, and though her voice was still stoic, her eyes were burning with conviction. Naruto is the only light I have left in this world of darkness, and the only person who can truly understand me. Even if I didn't love him, I would never betray him. I'll hold you to that, Tsunade told the brunette. With the minor confrontation and relationship crises over, the blonde goddamn Hokage leaned back in her desk, propped her elbows on the table, and laced her fingers together in front of her face. Now, since we've gotten this out of the way, why don't you two tell me how you know each other? Naruto's shoulders slumped as he realized that he had just overcome one crisis only to run directly into another. Arguing over a relationship between two people's age difference was nothing compared to explaining how the woman he was set to marry belonged to a group of S-ranked criminals that were set of sucking the QB out of his body, which would consequently kill him. Talk about moving out of the stove and into the oven. You'd better break out the sake for this one, Hokage-sama, Naruto said, using the more respectful and suffix for the woman before him, letting Tsunade know just how serious this next issue was. This is going to take a long time to properly explain. Tsunade looked at the elite Jonin with a raised eyebrow, before deciding to do as told. Bringing out a bottle of sake and 3 cups, she poured all 3 of them a drink. Reaching out for hers, the woman took a sip, reveling in being able to drink something for this. After allowing herself a small moment of pleasure, she fixed the blonde with a level look. Start talking, Gaki. Right, Naruto sighed as he grabbed his own cup, taking a small sip before he began. It all started when I decided to separate myself from Ero Sennin for a bit to look for clues on Akatsuki's whereabouts on my own. Zox. Pain found himself staring into the raining sky as he stood upon the balcony of the towering structure he had claimed as his base of operations. The clouds were particularly thick today, and the rain was much heavier than usual. It beat against the steel architecture with the sound of 1,000 drums being hammered at the same time, an endless drum beat that refused to stop for anything except a god. None of this mattered to Pain at the moment. The reanimated corpse he was using as his Deva path could feel neither the cold, nor the sting of 1,000 droplets of water being battered against his body. He simply continued to look out at the city as the heavens cried out their anguish to him. Madara, Pain stated as he felt a distortion behind him. He did not turn as the one calling himself Toby began appearing within a swirl of black chakra, first his orange swirl mask-covered head, then his body, followed finally by his arms and legs. You failed to keep the QB Jinchuriki occupied. Because of his interference, Jiraiya survived and now knows where my base is located. The boy was stronger than I thought he would be, Toby said, his voice gruff as he walked towards Pain. There was a limp in the masked man's steps, a sign that the leg he had reground and attached to himself was still giving him problems. He came to a stop beside Pain and looked out at the city. I underestimated him and it cost me. The boy is becoming more trouble than we expected, Pain said, his narrow-eyed gaze sweeping back and forth across Omegakure. We have underestimated him too much. First he killed Sasori, and then he defeated Hiden and Kakazu. He will need to be taken care of soon. Agreed. Pain's words went without saying. Namika's Naruto had become a major thorn in Tobi's side. Already several of the plans he had created were derailed, and the schedule for the sealing of the Bayou, as well as which Bayou he wanted to seal first, was no longer viable. That meant he would need to come up with an entirely new plan if he had any hope of completing his plan. Where is Conan? Asked Tobi as he finally seemed to realize that the woman who was always at Pain's side was no longer there. It was amazing he had not noticed when he first got here, but had to chalk that up to the fact that he was still in a good deal of pain. It was difficult to think when his new limbs were still giving him so many problems. She is gone, Pain said, his eyes narrowing into S. She betrayed us for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. What? If it weren't for the mask getting in the way, Pain would have most likely seen Tobi blink. However, Tobi was wearing a mask and so the Rinnegan user could not see the surprised blink the man made. Can you repeat that please? Conan has betrayed us for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, Pain restated, his narrowed eyes seeming to narrow further. When I was fighting against Jiraiya-sensei, she interfered and helped fend me off. Furthermore, she was carrying one of the Jinchuriki's Hiraishin kunai, and managed to summon him before I could finish her and sensei off. How is this possible? Asked Tobi. For the first time in a long time the orange spiral mask wearing Akatsuki member was flabbergasted. Conan was the last person I would have ever expected to betray you. Which was true. Unlike everyone else who had joined Akatsuki for their own reasons, Conan was strictly loyal to Pain. Everything she did was for him, and she had stayed by his side through thick and thin ever since they were younger. The idea that she would betray her best and dearest friend was unfathomable. That makes two of us. It was hard to tell what Pain was thinking. Of course, that could have something to do with the fact that the man before him was nothing more than a doll, a puppet being controlled by the real man that had once been known as Nagato. Even still, Tobi almost thought he detected a hint of hurt in the man's voice. What are you going to do about this? Pain was silent for a moment. He understood the real question that Tobi was asking. What was he going to do about Conan? Was he going to kill her? His dearest friend. The friend who had been with him through thick and thin, who had supported him through all of their hardships, who had agreed to capture the Jinchuriki with him, the woman he had at one point held a major crush on. The same woman who had just betrayed him for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. The woman who had told him she could no longer agree with his ideals. The woman who had fought him alongside Jiraiya, and had called the Kyuubi Jinchuriki using a ring that apparently had the seals for the Hiraishin on it. I will deal with her the same way I would deal with anyone who has decided to make an enemy of God. Tobi almost snorted at the ludicrous statement. Pain may be powerful, perhaps even more powerful than he was in many ways, but a god this man was not. Not by a long shot. Still, he would allow the fool his delusions. Pain was needed if his plans were to succeed. Well, you will have to deal with her another time, Tobi told him. As things stand, attacking Konoha outright is no longer a viable option at the moment. And what about Conan? Asked Pain, finally turning away from gazing at the rain to glare at the man who kept trying to dictate what he could do. It's unwise to leave a loose end like her around. She knows all of my secrets. And chances are the Kyuubi Jinchuriki already knows them, Tobi countered the man before he could continue. If she had the ability to summon Naruto, then it means they have been working together for some time now. Which made sense, now that he was thinking about it. Tobi had always wondered how Naruto had managed to arrive at Sunagakure just as Deodara and Sasori had been about to capture the Ichibi Jinchuriki. The intelligence he got was that the Namika's brat had been in the area after capturing a bounty and had just decided to go see his friend, but now that he really thought back on it, the whole incident had been far too coincidental. It was most likely that Conan had told him about Akatsuki's movements. That was the only way the Jinchuriki for the Nine Tails could have been in the right place at the right time to help fight off his minions. Then it is all the more imperative that we deal with her now. In Pain's mind, that was the only thing that made sense. His best friend had betrayed him for one of their enemies. The only way to rectify this situation was to kill her at his earliest possible convenience. It is very likely that you have no secrets left from Konoha, Pain, Toby chastised the man who thought himself a god. If you go there, they will be ready for you, and not even the vaunted powers of a god will be able to stand up to the full might of that village. Do not underestimate the powers of a god, Madara, Pain said dismissively. Dealing with Konoha will prove little trouble for one such as me. You fool, Toby hissed, finally losing his patience with Rinnegan Bearer. Do not underestimate the ninja of that village. He may have hated Konoha beyond all reasonable comprehension, but even he would never deny that they produced some of the most outstanding shinobi the world had ever seen. The Namikaze brat's power is not something to be trifled with, even without calling upon the Kyuubi's power. He has mastered his father's Hiraishin to an incredible degree, and his ability to use shawless ninjutsu is outstanding. While I have no doubt that you would ultimately triumph in a one-on-one fight against him, it would not be an easy battle. And if you fought against Konoha, you would not just be fighting against him. Even someone as powerful as you will not be able to best the Kyuubi Jinchuriki when he has the likes of Senju Tsunade and Hitaki Kakashi fighting with him. And that's not even going into how Conan will be fighting against you as well. Then what do you suggest I do? Asked Pain, and though his voice was just as even as always, Toby could tell the man was getting frustrated. We cannot risk allowing such a loose end to live. Conan knows all about our plans, and she knows the weaknesses of every member of Akatsuki. Leaving her alive will prove detrimental to our plans. Chances are she has already given Konoha all of your secrets. There was very little doubt in Toby's mind about that. If she has been working for the Namikaze brat for as long as he thought she had, then it was not much to assume Konoha already knew everything Conan did. At the very least Naruto already knew everything. So the point is moot. For now, we should focus on acquiring more power. Already 5 of our 9 members have been K, and we only have the Sanbi, the Yonbi, and the Gobi to show for it. And how do you suggest we do that? Asked Pain, visibly calming down. They were in a precarious position right now. Ever since Akatsuki had made their move against the Jinchuriki and hidden villages, things had rarely gone their way, and most of the blame could be laid solely at the feet of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. I have just been given some news that the Nibi Jinchuriki has left the village for Kiri, Toby began. And you want to have her captured en route? Pain was already guessing at what the man wanted to have done. It would be a simple matter to send Kisame to take care of the women. While she was strong, she only held the 2 tails. For someone like the monster of the hidden mist, she was nothing. No, Toby shook his head. She has the ability to summon the Namikaze to her side. Even if you went there yourself, there is nothing stopping him from simply flashing away with the girl. Instead I want you to attack Kumogakur, and capture the Hachibi Jinchuriki. You want me to go? The Deva Path raised an eyebrow. It was unusual for Toby to request that he go and do something, especially when the masked man knew that Pain was not one to be ordered around like the other Akatsuki members. I would have Kisame go, but I have a need for him to be elsewhere. Toby shrugged as if to say, what can you do? Also, the Raikage is strong, as is the Hachibi Jinchuriki. They call him the perfect host for a reason. While Kisame may be capable of taking the Hachibi one-on-one, I doubt he would be able to defeat the Raikage. And that was saying nothing about the village as a whole. Kumogakur was a heavily militarized village, and while they did not produce shinobi as outstanding as the ones from Konoha, they had a lot more ninja than the Hidden Leaf village did. You wish for me to destroy the village then? That made a good deal more sense. While Kisame was probably enough to capture the 8 tails, the man that had been dubbed Monster of the Hidden Mist was not strong enough to destroy an entire village, and especially not one as militarized as Kumo. No, Kisame would most certainly not be able to do that, but Pain could. With Conan's treachery now out in the open, it will only be a matter of time before Kiri, Kumo, and sooner learn about your abilities, Toby reasoned. If Conan was working strictly for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki like I assume she was, then it means that right now only Konoha knows about your abilities, but it's only a matter of time before they send that information to the other villages. We need to strike now while the other villages have no knowledge on your capabilities. It was a reasonable assumption, and quite possibly the only reason Pain didn't refuse Toby's request out of hand. Very well, Pain agreed, deciding that doing as Toby suggested was in his best interest. He would deal with Conan later, preferably when he had more power at his disposal so he could also take care of the Kyuubi Jinchuriki at the same time. Kumo will fall by my hand. It is time to show the world what a god can do when angry. Toby almost didn't manage to cover up his snort this time. You may think you are a god now, Nagato, but that is only because you have not seen what a true god among ninja can do. But he would eventually. If all went according to plan, then his most annoying pawn and the rest of the world would see what someone who had really been considered a god amongst shinobi could do. Zox. The trip home was very subdued. After Tsunade had grilled Naruto on everything he had been up to that had not been reported to her, and Conan on everything she knew about Akatsuki and pain in general, the pair had been let free. In any other circumstances, Naruto would have probably used the opportunity Conan's need to no longer hide presented to show said woman around Konoha, but as things stood, both of them were too tired dealing with the previous battles to do much more than head home. After entering the front door to the large house Naruto would now be sharing with Conan as well as Yugao, the pair took off the shoes and set them aside, before stepping into the house proper. Naruto turned his head and looked over at Conan with a slight smile. Why don't we get something to eat before choosing which room you will want to sleep in? Conan frowned for a moment, and were it not for the fact that she knew there was another woman living here, even if they had never met, she would have probably insisted on sleeping in his room. As things stood, it would be best to agree with his suggestion so as to avoid any unpleasantness with the other female she would be living with. She didn't want to cause trouble like Yugito and Mei had after all. Besides, it wasn't like having her own room meant she couldn't sleep with Naruto. She just wouldn't be doing it all the time. That sounds fine, she told Naruto as she followed him into the dining room. Why don't you take a seat while I get started on making some dinner? Naruto suggested as he walked over to the refrigerator and began searching its contents. Meanwhile, Conan sat down at the long table meant for quite a few people, set her hands down in front of her on said table, and began watching as Naruto moved about the kitchen, turning on the stove, getting out pots and pans, and setting aside ingredients like he had been doing it all his life. The dinner Naruto made was just a simple stir-fry, nothing extravagant. Not that he could truly be blamed. With everything that had happened in the last 24 hours, the blonde-haired Uzumaki was feeling more than a little tired. After dinner was over, he had every intention of sleeping like for a good 15 hours at least. It was just as Naruto had begun serving that one of the other two residents of the house, and the one who was more often than not at the Namika's estate, walked in. That smells so good, Fu mumbled as she entered the dining room. Her head tilted up and her nose twitching as she took several deep whiffs. It was quite clear that the girl was literally following her nose. Moreover, the female Jinchuriki with mint green hair was drooling, and when combined with the way her stomach rumbled, made it obvious that she had not eaten for at least several hours. Naruto and Conan watched in a mixture of amusement and wonder as Fu plunked down in the seat she always sat in when having dinner at the Namika's estate. Granted, such an instance was actually very rare, as the Nanabe's Jinchuriki preferred staying over at the Aberrane clan grounds. Would you like to eat with us, Fu? Asked Naruto, his mouth turning into a very slight smile. Yes please, said Fu, still drooling. Naruto was amused to note that the girl seemed to be completely oblivious to Conan's presence. He wondered if the hunger was the cause. Hold on, Naruto said, scurrying back into the kitchen. Let me get you a plate. Doing exactly what he said he would, Naruto opened the cupboard where he stored his plates and bowls, and grabbed one for Fu, along with a set of chopsticks. He came back out mere moments later and set the dish and eating utensils in front of her. Almost before Naruto had even finished putting the plate down, Fu began dishing up her food. Naruto and Conan shared another look. This one questioning, as both of them wondered the same thing. You're pretty hungry today, Fu, Naruto commented just as the girl he spoke to finished putting the amount of food she wanted on her plate. The Namika's clan head suddenly found himself very grateful that he had made so much, because Fu had taken enough food to feed an Akamaki. Her plate had a literally mountain of food on it. That's quite a bit of food. Are you sure you can eat it all? He asked, honestly wondering where such a waifish girl planned on putting all that food. Fu as she stuffed her face. Her chopsticks were a literally blur as they moved from the plate to her mouth. The small mountain of food she was eating began to disappear right before the very eyes. She only stopped once to speak, and even then her mouth was so filled with food Naruto could barely make out what she said. I hab hom wheely hab braming bode. Ah, ha, Naruto murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. Though it was apparently not quite enough, because Fu spoke to him again. Yeb, Hibian, Hino, haven't you been barring with me? It's buff. I see. Naruto got out, watching with an almost sick fascination as the food on Fu's plate quite literally vanished before his very eyes. He was really beginning to wonder about where the girl was storing all that food. How could someone so tiny possibly eat so much? Beside him, Conan seemed to be much the same way, only worse. Her nose was wrinkled and her face looked almost green as she watched the tiny female vacuum down the food like an akamiki at an all-you-can-eat buffet after having fasted for a month. She looked like she was going to be sick. Finally, after what felt like hours, but was in truth only a few seconds, Fu's plate was cleaned of food and even seemed to have been polished to a shine, making Naruto wonder if the Nanabe Jinchuriki had licked the plate sometime while he was watching her and he just hadn't seen it. The girl with mint green hair put her chopsticks down and released a content sigh as she patted her belly. Ah, now that really hits the spot. Thanks for making dinner, Naruto-san. You're welcome, Naruto managed to choke out, shocked. He had seen many things in his rather short life, but he had never seen someone eat like Fu just had. Not even he was this bad, not even when it came to ramen. It was only after had eaten her fill and spent a few moments staring vacantly at the table that she finally noticed the beautiful blue-haired woman sitting at the table with them. Naruto-san, who is this? Ah. Naruto blinked, his head shaking as he found something to focus on other than Fu's phenomenal ability to put away food like an akamiki after going on a hunger strike. That's right. You haven't met yet, have you? He had nearly forgotten that he only summoned the Bluenet when no one else was around, since he hadn't wanted even a hint of her idini leaking out and somehow getting back to Akatsuki, and more specifically Pain. This is Conan, one of my betrotheds. It's a pleasure to meet you, Fu-san, Conan said with a slight bow of her head. Fu gave her a bright smile that was so different from the lifeless eyes she used to have. It's nice to meet you as well. The girl then tilted her head, and looked at Conan curiously for a moment. Wait, if you're one of Naruto-san's betrothed, how come I've never seen you come over? Naruto was very grateful that Fu was looking at Conan so intently that she didn't notice him wince. He was hoping to avoid telling anyone about his lover's role as his spy in Akatsuki until Soon had decided what they should with the information the Bluenet had given them. He should have realized that something like this would have happened, if not with Fu then most definitely with Yugao, who, even though she was giving a relationship with him a chance, had yet to meet Conan. Fortunately for him, Conan was able to come to his rescue. I have come over before, but because I was on a long-term mission that required me to stick around, I couldn't be summoned very often. Oh, Fu blinked, then nodded her head. Well, that makes sense. The green-haired girl stood up and stretched. Anyways, I think I'm going to hit the sack. I'm pretty tired from all training I've been doing with Shino-kun and his family. Alright, see you tomorrow then, Naruto said as the girl gave them a wave and left the dining room. Naruto-kun, Conan said after a moment of silence passed through the room. Yeah, I don't think I'm very hungry anymore. Neither am I. Zox. Later that night Naruto lay awake in bed unable to sleep. The shades on his window were pulled up, allowing the moonlight to spill into the room. They cast shadows along the walls that seemed to warp and twist in unnatural ways, or maybe that was just Naruto's mind playing tricks on him as the guilt over the recent events with Jiraiya washed over him. His sensei had almost and it was his fault. Naruto couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if he had been honest with his sensei and informed him of Conan and Nagato's involvement in Akatsuki from the start. He had always assumed that if Jiraiya knew his old students were still alive, then he would have gone to them in an attempt to make the one now calling himself Pain see reason, but he couldn't help but wonder now, would that have really happened? Due to not being let in on what had transpired between him and Conan, Jiraiya had gone to Omegakure anyways. He had not only gone there and been confronted by Nagato, but had been completely unprepared for the man's power and abilities, and because of that he had nearly been K. He likely would have too were it not for Conan's timely intervention. How better off would Jiraiya have been if he had known about Pain's abilities from the start? What would have happened if Naruto had been up front and gone with him when he went to confront Pain? Would they have been able to defeat him? He hadn't done anything because he didn't want to tip the man calling himself Toby off and force the masked man to act before he was ready. But in doing so he had almost lost his sensei, and while Jiraiya was not he was now one arm short, making jutsu impossible unless he learned one-handed seals. As Naruto's mind began spiraling into a ring of depression and guilt, there was a knock on his door. A frown made its way to his face as he wondered who was at the door, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Getting up, the blonde shinobi silently made his way over, before opening the door to his room. Just as he thought, Conan was standing in front of his door. She was wearing a blue nightgown that matched her hair and went down to just below her knees. After his eyes made their almost customary trail over her body, the nightgown barely covering her curvaceous figure, he looked up and noticed the uncertainty on her face. Her eyes were flickering from his face to the side, and she was worrying her lower lip between her teeth, a sign that she was nervous. Conan, Naruto started, his voice concerned as he tried to figure out what was wrong with his lover. Of course, he realized it wouldn't be possible to discover the source of her problems without asking her, so quickly decided the best way to get to solve whatever ailed her was the direct approach. He liked being direct anyways. What's wrong? Can't sleep. Conan shook her head. Can I come in? She asked softly, and Naruto gave her a nod before moving out of the way, allowing her to silently pad into the room. She stopped over by the window, her arms crossing under her bust as she released a small shiver. It wasn't from the cold, Naruto noticed. He walked over to her, slowly wrapping his arms around her midsection. When she didn't protest, and even began to lean into him, he tightened his hold until she was being held securely in his arms. What's wrong? Conan didn't respond for a moment, and for a second Naruto had to wonder if she would explain at all. After a few seconds, however, she began to speak, her voice slightly stilted with emotion. I was just thinking about what happened in Omegakure, she murmured softly. When Jiraiya-sensei fought with Pain, she corrected herself quickly, though Naruto heard the stammer in her voice. He only just managed to withhold a wince. When I first stopped him from K-sensei, I tried to talk some sense in him, to make him see reason. However, he wouldn't hear any of it. I always thought that he would eventually come to realize that what we were doing was wrong. A part of my hope was that I could bring him around to our way of thinking if I kept talking to him about it, but he didn't listen to me. She stopped for a second, and her body gave a shudder as she clenched her eyes shut. He was perfectly willing to K me because I didn't agree with him. I never imagined he would be willing to K me, that he would have stooped so far into the darkness that he would be willing to K his childhood friend. But he was. If you hadn't shown up when you did, then I would have been before the day was out. This time Naruto did flinch. The thought of Conan being K made his insides rebel. The very thought that someone who meant so much to him, whose hopes and dreams coincided so much with his own, could be K by the best friend she had stood by and watched helplessly as he fell into darkness for years unsettled him more than he could ever admit. It wasn't something he wanted to think about. However, when I found out that Pain was perfectly capable and willing to K me, I realized something, Conan continued, mercifully saving Naruto from his defeatist thoughts. What we are doing is dangerous, more so than even being shinobi. Our desire for peace can only be achieved when the current system has been dismantled, and that will create a lot of enemies for us. With what we're doing, any day could very well be our last. Her hands grabbed his arms, and carefully pulled on him to loosen his hold on her. She turned around slowly until she was facing him. Amber eyes carefully stared into expressive blue, and the blue-haired beauty's hands came up and gently cupped Naruto's face. And I don't want to with any regrets in my life. Naruto brought a hand up and gently grabbed a hold of one of Conan's. He brought her hand to his lips and K her palm. None of us are going to I promise that no matter what happens, I'll protect you and everyone else. That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.